Hi everyone, my name is Seleta Reynolds. I'm the General Manager for Los Angeles Department of Transportation. I'm also the President of NACTO, which stands for National Association of City Transportation Officials. So 74 of the biggest cities in the United States and transit agencies that all get together and plot to take away your lanes and put in bike lanes. Just kidding. We sit around and try and figure out how to make streets better for everybody, no matter how they travel in cities, because as you've heard from the previous speakers, there is a bright line between how we've designed our streets, climate, health, safety, and really community happiness and cohesion. And living a great life, no matter where you are. So the first thing that I like to start with is that, this is our vision, right? And then really drawing your attention to this word dignity, that we consider this to be a place where, as the city, we have really fallen down in thinking about how to treat people with dignity through the design of the public realm. Because what we have right now is not a public realm that treats people with a lot of dignity, right? This is not something that we all look at and think, wow, we really nailed that transportation thing, didn't we? We're really just, it's amazing. And LA gets a lot of heat for our traffic, but a lot of big cities, I could have pulled this same picture from the San Francisco Bay Area, from Washington, D.C., from New York, right? We have gotten ourselves into a place where we're the frog in the water, and we sort of over time, we're living with these things, these externalities of the way we designed our system, as though they are just a natural occurring event. That in Los Angeles you can get to 12 times as many jobs in an hour by car as you can by transit. So if you can't afford a car, there is a hard ceiling on your ability to pull your family up out of poverty or to keep them from falling into poverty. And, if everybody has to drive a car to get to opportunity, we will drown. And we are drowning because of how inefficient cars are and how much space they take up. And our most precious resource, as you see in some of Juan's pictures, that people fight for every precious inch in cities, is space. It's the #1 cause of death for kids in LA County. And when we show this stat, people get real outraged about the fact that guns are also on this list, but they just accept #1 as though there's nothing we could do about it. So how'd we get here? Well, we started out with good intentions. Actually, the American Wheelmen were the ones that marched over to cities and said, we need to start paving lanes for this very disruptive technology called a bicycle. And that was in the 1880s, which is the same decade that Carl Benz patented the internal combustion engine. And by the 1910s, we started to put in, these things started to sprout up in cities, and you don't actually plant a seed and they sprout up. I know it feels that way sometimes, but people actually design and put these in. The American Automobile Association began to advocate heavily for these kinds of traffic control devices to bring order to this chaos. And actually in Los Angeles in the 20s, we're the first city in the United States to criminalize jaywalking. So we made it a crime to walk across the street. We criminalized walking, and we have continued to take up more and more space for the other disruptive technology, which was at the time going to connect us to opportunity. It symbolized freedom, individual liberty, and most of all, speed. We kept on designing our cities around this technology, and if you want to look at the legacy of institutional and systemic racism in cities, just take a look at where the freeways go and where they don't. Because they were designed to connect wealthy white neighborhoods to opportunities, and they walled off low-income neighborhoods of color from those same opportunities forever and ever, amen? And as you heard from Juan, some of those communities, like Boyle Heights, are dealing with very real, very visceral, everyday negative impacts of the legacy of ripping our city apart in this way. By the 70s, we sort of said, wait a second. We had dismantled our last red car line, and we looked around and didn't like what we saw. So we started to take a deep breath and figure out how we could change the quality of our air and the quality of life. So where do we go from here? At LADOT, we've developed what we call something called transportation happiness, and this is our mobility bill of rights that we want to use to guide our decision making. And it gets into a lot of the obvious things. You want to be able to get around, you want that to be reliable, you want to connect to opportunity, but we also want to think about some of the deeper reasons why some communities don't have access to physical activity. And yes, it's the system design, but it is also the fact that we have policed people out of public spaces in neighborhoods in this city because of the color of their skin. And if we don't start talking about the connection among all of those different issues, and that is where, branching out and reaching out to different disciplines like public health and work around racial and socioeconomic equity, we will never get to where we're going if we just design bike lanes. So, we've taken a shot at, you heard Juan talk about Vision Zero. This is a movement that started in Sweden. A lot of cities around the United States have a goal now to get to zero traffic deaths. Our goal is to get there by 2025. We have a long way to go, and we are losing ground. 250 people died last year on the streets that LADOT manages and operates. And so, we have tried to help people understand why that is. And it's not because people are looking at their smartphones when they're walking across the street. It's because people are looking at their smartphones when they're behind the wheel of a car. And it's because we are buying more cars that are bigger and faster. SUVs make up a much higher percentage of the American automobile fleet on the roads right now. And if you are smaller or frailer and you get hit by a car that has its nose up off the ground, you are going to get pulled underneath that car, you are going to have a head injury, and you are likely going to die if that car is going faster than 25 or 30 miles an hour. So we needed to startle people out of their sort of acceptance of the way things are. We worked with artists. We put up pennants underlining the number of people who have been injured or killed at different locations around Los Angeles. We tried to bring in performers to bring some levity to the situation. These are luchadores who are walking kids across the street in Westlake. We worked with kids to put together this campaign, which is called Temple Street Slow Jams. It turns out that, y'all know that song, Suavecito? No? See? No? Yes? Yeah. And Despacito, Suave, Suavecito. It turns out the same things you should do to attract a mate on the dance floor are the things you should do if you want to save somebody's life traveling through their neighborhood. And that's take it slow. Don't come on so fast. Chill out, right? Forming these partnerships in neighborhoods is really important to us. But redesigning the neighborhoods themselves is equally important. So this is a project we did at Crenshaw and Florence where we asked the neighborhood to redesign their streets. And they created this giant scramble crosswalk and turned the crosswalk into piano keys and ran a parade down the middle and let people cross in every direction. And we took that to Hollywood and Highland and put it on the ground and actually have saved at least 36 or 40 people's lives with this very simple intervention. It is the paint on the streets that is the difference between somebody surviving and not surviving a crash with a car. And so we've tried to do as much as we can to bring attention to that, but to do it with joy and to remind people that the streets are a public place. They are a place for us to come together, and the street as it looks today is not the street as it has always been, and it is not the street as it always shall be. Another project we have to get to the same point is called Play Streets. This is a project where we took a look around and we saw that there were hundreds of thousands of kids in LA County who do not have access to open space, who cannot get to a park, who cannot get outside to spend time getting access to physical activity. And part of that may be that there's not a park in their neighborhood, but part of it may be that they have to cross a gang line to get to the park in their neighborhood. And so there are lines, real, visible and invisible, that keep kids away from things that could save their lives. So we took a look at the asset we have, which is 15% of the public space in this city, which are our streets. And we said, what can we do differently to try and solve this problem? Because if I can't just wait for the Rec and Parks Department to solve the problem. I want to solve the problem. So we started asking communities if they wanted to turn their street into a playground. And they said yes. So we created something we call the box of play. We roll it up, we close the street to cars, we open it to people. We created this thing we call the Wobble that people can, it's designed to be able to, if you are sort of 3 feet high or shorter, that it works at your level, that it's light enough for you to pick up, that you can stack it, that you can rock in it, and that neighborhoods themselves can use these tools to close their own streets, to empower them to create these kinds of outcomes. And we've connected 100,000 people to open space who did not have access before. These are not expensive interventions, but we ought to be able to do these things every day at scale in every neighborhood in the city of Los Angeles. So, last I'm going to close with this. Right? Friend or foe, this is here to stay. And what this has done is changed in probably a fundamental way, the way that you interface with your choices about how to get around in a city. Because all of these, every single one of these private companies that are founded for profit, open up in the App Store in the palm of your hand. And they do so by agreeing to a set of terms and conditions that Google and Apple put out for them. You want to be in our App Store? You got to agree to our terms and conditions. And, you know, this is, I'm not really making this up. I mean, this is close to things that people have pitched to me, but say tomorrow, you know, it's something like this. Because when the Disco Taxi Bot opens up in the palm of your hand, it also opens up in the city's app store, and that app store is the public realm, and it belongs to all of us. And when we have private companies and millions of dollars of venture capital building wealth on public assets, we need to have our own set of terms and conditions to hold these companies accountable to reach the goals we care about, to correct racial and social inequities, to deal with safety, to deal with climate, because they proliferate, right? And if you've been on the west side of Los Angeles, you know that this is what happens, right? And every single one of these little taxi bots is creating a new map of the city. They're communicating with each other, they're communicating with their mothership, but they're not communicating with me. So the city, we think, needs to put ourselves back in the middle of all of this, because it really doesn't matter if it's this, or if it's this, or if it's this, or if it's this, right? All these things are coming. That what changed isn't the device, it's the business model. And the city is really interested in figuring out how we can communicate with machine language using the new business model so that we can be the owners and managers of the public realm. We should be able to know and say where these devices can and can't go, how many of them there are, and because we manage the public realm right now this way, right? This is 1.0 infrastructure. It's this way all the time. It tells you where you can stop. It tells you where you are. But in the future, we want to manage the public realm like this, right? What if, as an Uber or Lyft, as you're approaching the curb, you check whether or not the space is there, you ping the city's operating system, I tell you, yes, it's free. You ask me how much it's going to cost, because it has a value. I tell you how much it's going to cost. You start the drop-off, you end the drop-off, and then you release it for the next person. Now, I manage it if I can do that at scale, because eventually I'm going to need to be able to do it 500 feet up in the air, and probably underground, because, you know, billionaires are building tunnels under Los Angeles. And I'm going to need to be able to price and manage that infrastructure towards these policy goals. The stakes are really high, and if we don't insert public policy back into this mix and put our finger back on the scale, we risk ceding the public realm to private interests commercialization. So for us, it's really about this, right? All of the technology, all of the innovative work we do on the streets, it's very much for me about inspiring the pilots of tomorrow. Thanks.